Hello and welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia, Amane's route. In the last episode, day 8 and 9 was passed for the girls in the valley where they were stuck. They are now without their teacher, who had taken half of their food with them. Let's continue. The 10th day in the valley. Rain yet again. I'm beyond sick of it. The instant it starts coming down, I can just feel all the energy draining right out of my body. My head feels like a brick. Even inside the tent, the water just keeps seeping into everything, and probably thanks to the constant moisture, there's this increasingly nasty smell of moss and mold in the air. For the last few days, the rain has been growing heavier. It feels like we're entering the rainy season in earnest. Today, it's a very persistent storm, and I don't think it's likely to let up anytime soon. Somehow I can tell from the sound of the raindrops against the canvas. On that subject, the bigger raindrops that happen to sneak directly through the cracks in the trees hit the tent with a random timing, making the sound very hard to tune out. It's getting maddening at this point, although I suppose my empty stomach is the major cause of my irritation. I picked up this persistent vocal tick of moaning, I'm hungry, at random intervals. Recently, Kazuki started to get pissed off by it. She shoot me that little frown of hers and say, I'm well aware of that, thank you. If I keep complaining anyway, she ends up yelling, shut up and go to sleep, or something. Excuse me, but I don't remember saying any such thing. Huh? As I recall, I merely said, when there's nothing to be accomplished by moving, sleeping is a vital job in its own right. Jeez, Kazuki, don't peek over my shoulder when I'm writing in my diary. I didn't peek at anything. You've simply been speaking out loud as you write. I had no choice but to overhear, you know. Huh? No way. Seems you weren't even aware. This is quite the serious condition. Do be careful about this, Amane. You are rather reminiscent of a chef mumbling complaints to himself as he cooks his customers' pork out cutlets. Distinctively creepy. The heck is with that analogy? I don't really get it, but can you not stare seriously into my eyes as you call me creepy? It's not doing wonders for my self-esteem. Here, I'll let you have a snail I caught. Gnaw on that and cheer up. I'm sick of escargot. Really want to eat something that isn't slippery little bug for once. Snails are land mollusks, you know? Well, I suppose they are all invertebrates, so the distinction may seem somewhat academic, but more importantly, Amane. Kazuki pointed to her cheek with one finger, as if to tell me I had a grain of rice stuck to the corner of my mouth. After a brief moment of confusion, I brought my hand up to my face. My fingers quickly found something slimy on my cheek. That is to say, a leech. I'd grown exceptionally tough-minded about this sort of thing. Another leech wasn't going to get a scream out of me this late in the game. Carefully peeling the creature off my cheek, I held it between my fingertips in both hands, dug my nails into its body and ripped it apart. This was another lovely side effect of the rain. Leeches had begun to find their way inside our tent. After waking up, peeling the bloodsuckers off my body was becoming the first part of my daily routine. First and foremost, I had to peel them off my eyelids. Next, the ones sticking to my neck, wrist and ankles. The leeches seem to have a particular fondness for these points where the body grows narrow. Other than that, they'd also go for places where the skin was thin, the back of my knees and elbows, my armpits, my groin. There were even a few that burrowed in between my toes as if trying to make themselves a cozy little nest. The first few times this happened, we'd shriek hysterically when we broke, but after a few days we lost the will to even moan. And either our bodies had developed resistance to hearing or we just gotten used to treating the bites, as the trickle of blood from the wounds would now stop after only an hour or so. Kazuki speculated our growing sodium deficiency might be affecting the salinity of our blood, but there was no way to tell for sure. As the day crept into evening without a break in the rain, Kazuki and I headed to the large tent in order to visit Hiroka-san and Sakurai-senpai. Outside, I started the usual fire under the primitive stove, made the usual thin, watery wheat soup, and boiled the usual bucket of hot water. With the gruel in my right hand and the hot water in my left, I made my way into the hospital tent. It was important to remember which was in which hand, since it was no longer obvious which was the water and which was the gruel. Calling it gruel was a bit of a joke by this point. At a glance it looked more like a stone soup. Even so, since we were mixing in a bit of the rice distributed to Kasagi and me, the wounded Sakurai and Hiroka were still eating slightly better than the rest of us. I boiled the water. Thank you, Amane. Could you please sterilize this washcloth in the water, then use it to wipe Hiroka-san's body? Yeah, will do. Kazuki didn't turn around when I entered the tent. She was steadily unwinding the yellow-stained bandages from Sakurai's stomach, removing the gauze from her wound to be replaced. We washed the gauze over and over in boiling water to the point where it was beginning to blacken. It made for all the more striking contrast against the yellow pus that permeated its surface. No matter how many times we carefully disinfected Sakurai's laceration, the suppuration wasn't showing any signs of stopping. If we weren't in this situation, it surely wouldn't have been difficult to treat, but given our unsanitary conditions and utter lack of medical supplies, we simply couldn't stop the bacteria from multiplying. Above all else, the patient wasn't getting the nutrition her body needed to fight its way to recovery. When I reached out for the dirty gauze in order to sterilize it for reuse, I noticed something squirming on its surface. It was a maggot. Thrashing its fat little body madly from within the depths of the pus that had soaked into the gauze, it almost seemed to be consciously trying to crawl back towards Sakurai's stomach. I'm alright here. Please focus on Hiroka-san. Okay. Immersing the washcloth, a strip of cloth cut from an old t-shirt, in the hot water, I left it to soak and began to unbutton Hiroka-san's uniform. At first she'd been quite embarrassed to be seen naked, but by now she submitted quietly without even squirming. She might simply have lost the energy necessary to feel shame. Hiroka-san's chest had withered dramatically since the first time I wiped her clear. Her ribs stood out distinctly against the surface of the skin, and that skin was mottled here and there with small white flecks. The small fuzzy little spots could be dusted off by hand. At first I thought them to be something like cotton dust from a sleeping bag, but when I asked Kazuki, I learned for the first time that mold can grow on a living human body. Hiroka-san was covered in pale white mildew. Hold on just a second, okay? I'll wipe it off with a hot towel right away. What? I didn't hear you. Hiroka's dry, cracked lips were moving slightly. I lowered my ear to her mouth. I just want to die. It's okay, it's just a little mold. Scooping the washcloth out of the hot water with a pair of chopsticks, I waited for it to cool below scalding, then gave it a vigorous squeeze. My whole body is so itchy. I'm going out of my mind. I can't take this anymore. Hold on, I'll get you clean in no time. I dropped the moderately hot towel against Hiroka-san's body and began to wipe. The mold came off cleanly, but underneath there were innumerable angry, swollen red welts where fingernails had dug into her flesh. You really need to try not to scratch, remember? The more she scratched, the more she spread the mold across her body. I'm sorry, I just couldn't stand it. Wide-scale, unrelenting itchiness is absolute torment. No matter how firmly you are told not to scratch, you unconsciously claw at your body while asleep. Hiroka-san's reflexive habit had grown so extreme that we'd actually tried binding her hands to prevent this. That night, she'd woken up the entire camp screaming. Writhing her body against her restraint, she had scraped her body against the hard ground, crying again and again for help. Thank you, Susan. That feels nice. When I wiped her body clean, the itchiness would reduce at once. She described it as almost blissful sensation. Even so, that comfort would last only an hour or two at most. Once wrapped up in her sleeping bag, the itchiness would return as her body temperature began to rise. I was now making the time-consuming trip to wipe her clean many times a day. Sorry, I'm nothing but a burden, aren't I? I really am sorry, but I'm sure I'll die soon, okay? Until then, I'm sorry. It's okay, don't talk like that, alright? I'm just wiping you off. I'll do that much anytime. Try to cheer up. If anything, it was bitterly sad to know there was nothing more I could do for her, no matter how hard I tried. Susan, I'll repay your kindness someday. Yeah, you do that. So first off, you got to survive this, alright? Even if I die, I will never ever forget this. As she spoke, tears began to run in little streams from Hiroka's face. Look, please don't say stuff like that, okay? It's fine, you're not going to die. Wiping a tear from Hiroka-san's cheek with the tip of my finger, I reflexively brought it to my mouth. Hiroka-san's tears were still salty. I was slightly envious of that. The 11th day in the valley. It was still raining. It had never stopped raining. There was nothing to do but sit around shivering and wait for the weather to clear. Doing nothing all day took surprisingly heavy toll in its own right. After 10 minutes or so of aimless idleness, you'd be seized by an anxious, impatient need to do something. Anything. But it was impossible to step outside even briefly without being drenched in the downpour. The cold rain would drain your energy with terrifying swiftness, and once you got wet, you stayed that way. We knew it was dangerous to stay so close, but we just didn't have the means to get them dry. The constant seeping rainwater had begun to corrode the thin material that made up the bottom of our tent. Lying down, even with the buffer of the sleeping mat, would leave our whole bodies sopping wet. We had no choice but to sit and wait. In the afternoon, the rain slowed to a heavy drizzle. I had just managed to get a cooking fire going when an eerie sound began to echo across the camp. Someone was singing loudly. It was unmistakably Ibuki's voice. Finally lost it, huh? Kaneda laughed harshly, an ugly contorted excuse for a smile on her face. Shut the hell up, Ibuki! In an attempt to end the mournful grimace-inducing dirge, Kaneda-senpai hurled a rock in Ibuki's direction. The stone fell a few feet short, and Ibuki turned out in our direction to examine it. Her face was ghastly white, her skin dull. It looked as though she had aged 20 years in the last few days. Picking up the muddy stone, Ibuki pressed it to her nose and sniffed curiously. Apparently deciding it wasn't food, she tossed it casually aside and continued her song. When the world grows warped around you, those who can't bend simply break. But watching Ibuki caterwauling idly at the rain-cloud-filled sky as to summon the sun, I wondered if derangement might sometimes be a blessing rather than a curse. What is wrong with her? She goes totally off into La La Land like that every once in a while, but after a while she'll start talking normally again, and eventually she's back to the same old Buki. It's apparently a symptom of undernutrition. So what? Are we going to end up like that eventually too? Kaneda-senpai, were you on a diet before coming here or anything like that? Nope. Then I think you'll probably be alright. From what Kazuki had told me, Ibuki had been repeatedly subjecting herself to severe gimmicky diets over the last few months, leaving her with chronic vitamin deficiencies. Since arriving here, that pre-existing condition had apparently worsened the effect of malnutrition on her body, giving rise to impaired brain function. Wonderful, just what we need. To be honest, Komori is not holding it together too well herself. Komori was still shut up in the tent, nursing her dog through a high fever. Apparently she was feeding every scrap of her rations to the animal. Her family runs a candy store, you know. Both of her parents were always busy, never really had the time to bother with her, and she doesn't have any brothers or sisters. So I guess she sort of made dogs into her siblings or something. I mean, I know where she's coming from, but even as Kaneda spoke those carefully neutral words, her mouth was twisted with undisguised loathing. Her true feelings were written on her face. She ambiguously hated that feverish, immobile little dog. It was of no use to her, and she wanted it to disappear. It was as simple as that. Everyone's getting weaker and weaker. At this rate, we're all going to die. I understood from the tone of her voice that this wasn't more of the usual gallows humor. I understood with such painful clarity that I wished she'd said nothing at all. Glancing up at the sky as the rain began to intensify yet again, I slowly picked myself off my seat of a rock. I can't take this. Couldn't we at least catch a break on this rain? It was adding insult to injury. Knowing full well that it was ridiculous, I did my best whiny preschooler impression and asked Kazuki to make the rain stop. As I keep telling you, I am not God. Come on, you're in the same neighborhood, right? Everyone called Kazuki a witch, well, except for those who called her a monster. In that case, a little rain magic shouldn't be too much to ask for, right? I mean, I knew it was idiotic, but asking is free. Oh. In response to my challenge, Kazuki closed both eyes and exhaled heavily through her nose as if to say, "Oh, very well then," and lifted both arms toward the sky. She spoke to the heavens. "Oh, to it. Oh, rain, I command you to be gone." An exceptionally half-hearted command that dissolved into an open-mouthed yawn at the end. I appreciated that she was considerate enough to play along with my nonsense, but if she was going to bother, couldn't she at least have pretended she was taking it seriously? But well, as it turned out, an hour or so after that, maybe, the rain really did come to a sudden stop. You had to laugh. Kazuki craned her neck back, idly gazing up as the clouds flowed peacefully by. Don't knock it until you try it, as they say. And spoke characteristically impudent words in her characteristically sleepy voice. Staring at her face from the side, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The witch theory was seeming increasingly plausible. Not that, on reflection, I really cared if she was some sort of black magician. It'd be nice to have one on our side right about now. If I asked her to spirit everyone to safety for her next trick, I wonder what would happen. Asking's free, after all. I looked over at Kazuki, debating whether to throw this new challenge at her, but before I could decide, she just stared into my eyes and spoke. It can't be everyone. I already said as much. I keep telling you it's bad manners to answer the question before I ask it. Your thoughts always appear in bold type on your face the instant they pop into your head. It's quite convenient. It can't be everyone. Her tone of voice was surprisingly breezy, but somehow also exceptionally firm, as if the outcome was set in stone, as if she was merely repeating an established fact. Kazuki's internal calculation must have established something very close to a 100% possibility that more of us would die in this place. I repeatedly asked her about the details of her predictions, receiving only variations of the frustrating non-answer. If I told you the future I predicted would change. When I finally told her that changing the future sounded like a pretty good idea to me, she coolly replied, even if it would mean more, none of us would survive at all. And I found myself at an utter loss for words. Well, maybe not utter, there was still one old reliable that came to mind. Are we done here? Don't look at me like that. I'm perfectly aware that I'm an idiot. You don't have to rub it in. Even now, Kazuki said the possibility of everyone surviving wasn't quite zero. By believing in those words, I could hold on to hope. If I had hope, I could find the strength to go on. Yeah, that's right. I have to be stronger than this. But it was hard. It was very hard. A full 2 days had passed since Mr. Ochi left the camp, and as always, there were no signs of rescuers active nearby. Naturally, our teacher hasn't returned either. Is Mr. Ochi lying dead in a ditch somewhere? Maybe he's gotten to some safe place and just abandoned us here. What do we do if he never comes back? Amid a flurry of aimless speculation, we passed the days waiting for help to arrive. They didn't come today, but they'll definitely come tomorrow. They didn't come today either, but they'll probably come tomorrow. Mr. Ochi said he'd get help no matter what when he left here. Not even half the group really believed it. But even so, somewhere deep down, every one of us was clinging to that glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he'd save us all. That maybe grew feebler by the day, eroded by cruel reality. Even as we came to understand that waiting would only bring us slow death, we clung to that shred of hope, piling speculation upon speculation. We built excuses out of sand. We convinced ourselves it was too early to decide. We stayed where we were and we waited for nothing. Trapped in oblivious lethargy, we lived for nothing but to avoid death. When our stomachs growled, we chewed on blades of grass and insects. When our throats were parched, we gulped from the first puddle of dirty water we saw. Naturally, it wasn't long before our stomachs turned violently against us. Somebody said chewing bamboo charcoal might be effective against diarrhea. Within hours, everyone's mouth was stained black. We searched and searched for anything edible. As long as it was digestible, we ate it. Anything and everything. The rest of our time was spent lying in the sleeping bags, stroking our cramping, weak stomachs as we pretended to sleep. If we were lucky enough to fall unconscious, there was a brief respite from the pain. The 12th day in the valley. Lately, I was waking every morning from dreams of food. Walking in the forest, I come across a trailer cart with broken wheels. When I draw close and look over the edge, there's a huge cardboard box full of canned food just sitting inside. Not just full, bursting at the seams. There are dozens of cans in that box. Beef boiled with soups, with soy sauce and ginger, mackerel cooked in miso, even canned peaches and pineapples. Untucking my shirt to make a pouch, I cautiously loaded full of cans, making sure to stay alert and keep an eye on my surroundings. If I bring all this back, everyone will be able to eat until our stomachs are bulging. What a fantastic windfall, the looks on their faces when I come back. Not to worry, we have a can opener. But seriously, what was a bike cart doing all the way up in the mountains in the first place? A moment that that doubt flashes through my mind, I abruptly realize, oh, this is a dream. Anyway, I'll just take these back to camp now. Let's all gorge ourselves until we can't eat another bite. I tried to focus on that thought, but once the first realization hit, I could never manage to fall back into the illusion. Mostly I would wake up with a start at this point. The instant my eyes opened, my stomach began gurgling violently, and the wrenching physical pain of it twisted my face into a miserable grimace. Even if it was a dream, I wish I had at least taken a bite. When I wrapped up the story at this point, everyone would always laugh, "You're such an idiot, Amane." I'd hide half of the food. I'd give everybody one can, then hide the rest. I'd hide the whole stash and eat it in secret. The majority openly admitted something along those lines, then added with clear amusement that I was probably the only one stupid enough to come skipping right back without a second thought. It was now the 12th day. 12 days we spent living worse than stray dogs. Even among those who had been comparatively healthy, unmistakable symptoms of weakening were beginning to appear. The soft footsteps of death were creeping steadily up behind us. Behind us were growing impossible to ignore. Our nerves were raw from tension, our spirits timid and fearful. The first to be caught by our shadow pursuer was Komori-san's pet, Akun, the Shih Tzu Alione. It wasn't a durable breed by nature, and what food we had simply wasn't suitable for a dog with a weak stomach. And so, having fallen into a high fever during the days of relentless rain, Alione simply never opened his eyes again. He died quietly early this morning. Akun! Kneeling in front of the lifeless body, flat on its side with lips stiffly extended, Komori-san removed the collar from Alione's neck and wrapped it around her thin wrist. The dog had been like a brother to Komori, but she didn't break into loud wails over its corpse. Her strangled sobs forced their way out from behind clenched teeth, seeming all the more piteous for it. Nobody could find anything to say to her. After a time, someone mumbled about at least giving the animal a proper burial. Kazuki immediately raised an objection. What's this? Aren't we going to eat it? We'd all been vaguely thinking about it, but deeply ingrained social norms had kept us from admitting that even to ourselves, and yet Kazuki had blurted it out almost casually. Eat it? The dog? Yes, let's have the poor creature be of use to us. At Kazuki's typically cold word, every one of us sharply drew breath. Eat? Yes, there was nothing in the world we wanted to do more at this moment. The dog in front of us was nothing but a corpse. Now that it was dead, it was no longer a dog, it was meat. Would it be okay to eat a dog that had died from sickness? It was Kazuki's suggestion, so presumably it was safe, but surely we couldn't start talking about this right in front of the grieving Komori-san, and this whole idea just felt so wrong. We all hesitated. The silence grew. To be honest, we wanted to eat it. But something inside us was still offering considerable resistance to the idea. Nobody could make up their mind. All eyes settled on our last remaining formal authority figure, Captain Sakashita. Yes, she's right about this. Let's eat it. From the expression on the captain's face, those undeniably callous words must have been tasted bitter in her mouth. Komori-san jerked her head up as if stung, then slowly turned from side to side, looking into our faces one by one. Everyone averted their eyes from Komori's tearful gaze, everyone except Kazuki, who met it firmly and gave her a small nod. Staring steadily down into those plaintive eyes, Kazuki murmured, "This is Alione's final duty." Komori-san's face crumbled as she slowly croaked out an answer. "I understand." Inhuman. The word was written clearly on Komori-san's face for anyone who cared to look. Even so, most of us let out a small, involuntary sigh of relief at her surrender. In that case, it would be best to make it into meat before the insects get started. But that relief was short-lived. Kazuki's words once again left us all frozen like stones. Right, if we're going to eat that corpse, we'd have to butcher it first. There was no other choice. We'd have to pluck the hair from the dog's body, carve it up using a knife. But of course no one wanted that job. Again, we looked to the captain. Biting a lower lip, the captain looked and turned to Kazuki, and finally Kazuki closed her right eye and tilted her head lightly to the left. I presume you're familiar with rock, paper, scissors, everyone? As the result of an impartial game of chance, the duty of processing the corpse fell on Koide-senpai. She tried briefly to resist, protesting, "I've never butchered a dog before," but of course none of us had made a habit of carving up puppies either, so the argument didn't really hold together. As the kitchen knives trembled dangerously in Qa'Rajh's hand, the captain tried offering some rough encouragement along the lines of, "You're a doctor's daughter, aren't you?" To be honest though, it was a little hard to grasp what that had to do with anything. Visibly bracing herself, Qa'Rajh gripped the knife firmly in both hands and took a step forward. But in that moment, her eyes met those of the dead dog below her, and she immediately burst into terrified tears. Naturally, the gallant hero Kazuki stepped in to save the day. Taking in her good hand the punishment rod she normally used to strike up the pan for a morning wake-up call, she swung it down with all her might on the dog's head. Everyone gasped in shock at the gruesome act, many barely stifling screams. If I start shrieking pointlessly, maybe I'm next. That irrational fear seized us all, and silence fell over the valley. You can't even tell where the eyes are now, right? Problem solved. Have at it. Meeting eyes with the dog is scary, is it? Then we'll just crush its eyes beyond recognition. It was about as elegant a solution as blowing off your jaw with a shotgun to cure a toothache. I can't. I just can't. This is too cruel. I can't do it. I suppose I can take over, but do tell me, what would you have done if I wasn't here? Say you were the only one who survived that fall. Nobody would be here to come to your rescue, you know? As she spoke, Kazuki tossed her wooden sword aside, then took the kitchen knife from Qa'Rajh's hand with a disdainful little snort. Everyone's got their hands full with their own problems right now. No one's going to protect you. If you're weak, you're simply going to die first. Kazuki might not have said it point blank, but her meaning was all too clear. We studied the ground at our feet in silence. The strong eat the weak. Men and beasts, insects and plant, all live and die by that rule. Many hissed about Kazuki's cruelty in low voices, but her powerful words and unhesitating actions left no room for open objection. Kazuki possessed not only the decisive personality of a leader, but also the ability to inspire fear, characteristic of a ruler. Everyone could only hang their heads and obey. You're quite the lovely person, you know that. Aren't I though? Your boyfriend told me the same thing in bed. Ugh. I'll let you know before anyone else when the meat is ready, so could you please give me some space for now? Captain Sakashita turned abruptly on her heel and stalked away without another word. That was pretty heavy-handed. The captain was crying, you know. Better this than another pointless fight, wouldn't you say? When you need to shut up a woman who's prone to irritating tirades, a firm preemptive strike of that sort is your only option. Who's this boyfriend of hers anyway? Not a clue, but judging from the way she didn't offer a rebuttal, I either hit a little too close to home, or else she has no romantic experience whatsoever and interpreted my comment as pointed mockery. Either way, it must have stung if she couldn't manage to retort any retort whatsoever. And what were you planning to do if she just snapped and jumped at you? Tell me, would you come swinging at a woman who had just casually crushed a dog's skull? See, there's a method to the madness. You had this all planned out from the start. You overestimate me. There was a non-zero possibility she'd attack regardless. Although, well, I suppose I did have a bit of contingency plan, namely allowing myself to be beaten black and blue in order to earn the group's sympathy. A woman who crushed a dead dog's head so that we could all survive, and a woman who lashed out violently from personal emotions and struck a wounded younger girl. Who do you think the majority would side with? You're a scary person, Kazuki. Yes, I'm well aware. I'm afraid I'll almost certainly never be popular with boys. Ever. I badly wanted to scream, if you're well aware, how about doing something about it? But I could anticipate her answer. No doubt delivered in her best nails on a chalkboard girly voice. I'm sorry, I just can't. It's too hard for little old me, or some such. It felt as though I had maggots crawling down my spine at the mere thought. In any case, if there was a single man in the world who'd want to go out with this woman, I'd really like to meet him, so I can get him the help he absolutely desperately needs. And so Kazuki cleaned and gutted the dog, reducing it to meat. We soaked it in barbecue sauce from the communal stockpile and cooked its little body golden brown. The powerful aroma of grease and spicy sauce wafted through the air. A swallowed mouthful of warm drool again and again. Just a few days ago, that hunk of meat had been an energetic, adorable little dog frolicking around Komori's feet. There was definitely a widespread feeling of guilt, but the sound of sizzling meat and the smell of dripping grease were irresistibly alluring. Even those who had whispered heatedly about Kazuki's inhuman cruelty couldn't overcome their own stomachs. When the meat was finally grilled and ready to be divided, they had all swarmed up with their plates and outstretched hands. I was the one who carved the meat for distribution. The rear legs looked to be the choicest and the most nourishing part of the body. Lopping off one with a kitchen knife, I placed it on Sakashita's plate. The second went to Kazuki. After that, I divided the meat as evenly as I could between the rest of us. We had even carefully washed the internal organs and cooked them as well. After distributing it all, there was nothing left to do but greedily devour my share. It felt like such a very long time since I'd tasted meat. The first bite was so delicious that I went into quite literally dizzy with bliss. My protein-starved tongue tingles as the animal fat slowly spread inside my mouth, and my stomach squeezed tightly in on itself as though consciously trying to wring every particle of sustenance from the food. Of course, it was an ornamental lapdog, a toy breed. When distributed among the entire group, its body provided us with a mere mouthful of meat each. Even so, we all wept with joy at the nourishment, and as soon as the meat was gone, everyone began crunching away at the bones. We had assumed Komori would firmly resist the idea of consuming her pet's flesh, but in the end she bit into her share of meat like all the rest, sniffling miserably the entire time, tears blending with mucus running from her nose. She ate. That one mouthful of meat kept us alive for today. I don't think we'll ever forget that taste for the rest of our lives, even if we wanted to. And that's where we'll end this episode, with the taste of dog on our tongue. So until next time, take care.